That line made a 4'8" kid from Zion, Illinois, the most famous child in America. For 8 seasons, the Drummond house was television's warmest fantasy. 2 boys from Harlem, a millionaire on Park Avenue, a staircase they slid down, and a family that loved each other no matter the color of their skin. The setup was simple and irresistible. A wealthy white widower named Philip Drummond had once employed a housekeeper in Harlem. When she was dying, she asked him to take in her 2 young sons. He did, and Diff'rent Strokes was born. Running on NBC and then ABC from 1978 to 1986 was 189 episodes of laughter built on a promise made over a deathbed. America fell in love with it. What America didn't see was that almost everyone who lived in that house was about to be marked by tragedy. But there was something about that staircase. One of them would be found at the bottom of his own stairs years later. And to this day, people argue about how he got there. One of them would die in a parked motorhome in Oklahoma at just 34, one day after telling a national radio audience she was finally clean. The man who played their father would live long enough to bury 2 of the children he adopted on screen. And the tragedy that swallowed this cast wouldn't stop with them. It would reach into the next generation and take a child who was only 14 when it all began. They call it the curse of Diff'rent Strokes. 7 of the people who walked through that famous front door are gone. Tonight, we're going to tell you exactly who they were and exactly how they died. Before we start, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read everyone. This is the cast of Diff'rent Strokes. Number 1. Gary Coleman. Start with the face of the show. Gary Coleman played Arnold Jackson for all 189 episodes from 1978 to 1986. He didn't just star in Diff'rent Strokes. He was Diff'rent Strokes, the catchphrase, the double take, the grin. At the height of it, he was reportedly the highest-paid child actor on television. He was born February 8, 1968 in Zion, Illinois, and adopted as an infant. His father was a pharmaceutical sales rep, his adoptive mother a nurse. And almost from the beginning, his body was working against him. Coleman was born with a congenital kidney disease. He had his first kidney transplant at age 2, his second at 17. The illness and the years of dialysis stunted his growth. He would stop at 4 feet, 8 inches tall for the rest of his life. That small frame was what put him on television. A talent scout from Norman's Lear's company spotted him for a pilot, and the camera loved him instantly. By 10, he was a national phenomenon. And then came the part of his story that turned the fairy tale sour, the money. At his peak, Coleman was reportedly paid as much as $100,000 an episode, a fortune for a child in the early 1980s, held in trust until he came of age. But when he turned 18 and went looking for the millions he'd earned, the trust was nearly empty. By the accounts that have followed him for decades, what should have held something close to $18 million had been drained to roughly $220,000. So in 1989, Gary Coleman did the unthinkable. He sued his own adoptive parents and his former manager for misappropriating his money. He won. The judgment came to about $1.3 million. But the years of legal war and the mounting medical bills from a lifetime of kidney disease had hollowed him out. In 1999, the most famous child star in America filed for bankruptcy. What he did next is the image people never quite let him live down. To make ends meet, Coleman took a job as a security guard at a California shopping mall. And in 1998, that job ended in handcuffs. He was charged with assault after punching a fan who'd been hounding him for an autograph, and the fan turned around and sued him for $1 million he no longer had. He auctioned off his belongings. He did cameo after cameo, cashing in on the very fame that had wrecked him. A quiet man off camera, he loved model trains and sometimes worked in hobby shops just to be near them. In a 1993 interview, he admitted something darker still, that he had already tried to take his own life twice. The little boy America adored had become a punchline he never asked to be. In 2005, he left Hollywood behind and moved to Santaquin, Utah, a town of fewer than 10,000 people. There he met a woman named Shannon Price on a movie set, where she was working as an extra. They married in 2007 when she was 22. Less than a year later, they were divorced, and they aired their problems publicly, even appearing together on the daytime show Divorce Court. But here is the strange part. After the divorce, they kept living together, still presenting themselves to the world as husband and wife. Which brings us to the staircase. On May 26, 2010, Coleman fell at his home and struck his head. The wound bled badly. Price called 911, and the dispatcher heard the panic in her voice. She described blood everywhere, said she didn't know what happened, said she was afraid he would die. Coleman was rushed to Utah Valley Regional Medical Center in Provo and placed on life support after suffering an intracranial hemorrhage, bleeding inside the brain. 2 days later, on May 28, 2010, at about 5 minutes past noon, life support was withdrawn. Gary Coleman was 42 years old. The decision to let him go was made by Shannon Price, his ex-wife. Police ruled it an accident. The state medical examiner found he had died of natural causes following an accidental fall and closed the case. But the questions never closed with it. There were reports that his living will called for life support to continue far longer than 2 days. And years later, on a televised lie detector special, Price was asked directly whether she physically caused his fall. She said no. The examiner said she failed. We may never know the truth of those stares. What we know is that the most famous child star of his generation died alone in his fame, in a small town a long way from Park Avenue. Arnold Jackson asked the question that made America laugh. Gary Coleman died, leaving behind a question no one has ever been able to answer. Number 2, Nedra Voles. After a death that heavy, here's a life that ran the other way. When Mrs. Garrett left the Drummond house, somebody had to keep it running. For a few seasons, that somebody was Adelaide Brubaker, a tiny, sharp-tongued grandmother who traded insults with Arnold and somehow always won. She was played by Nedra Voles, and Nedra Voles had already lived 3 lifetimes before she ever set foot on that set. She was born June 18, 1908, in Montrose, Iowa, the only child of vaudeville performers. She grew up on the stage, billed as Baby Nedra, part of the family tent show, until she was about 11 and too old for the name. In the 1930s, she sang as a featured vocalist with a touring jazz band. She didn't become a screen actress until she was already past the age most people retire, and then she worked constantly. Norman Lear put her in Good Times, One Day at a Time, and All in the Family. She was the postmistress on The Dukes of Hazzard. She kept going into her 80s. She played Adelaide on Diff'rent Strokes for 22 episodes, from roughly 1980 to 1984, then went right back to her busy schedule of guest spots. Her final film role came in 1996, credited, as she so often was, simply as Old Lady. Nedra Voles developed Alzheimer's disease in her later years. She died on January 20, 2003, in Mesa, Arizona, of complications from the disease. She was 94. She was cremated, and her ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean. In a cast defined by people who died far too young, Nedra Voles is the rare name who simply grew old. Adelaide kept the Drummond house in order for a couple of seasons. Nedra Voles kept working for nearly 30 years and lived to 94. The curse never came for her. Number 3, Mary Ann Mobley. When the show needed a new wife for Mr. Drummond in its final season, it cast a woman who had already been crowned the most beautiful in America. Mary Ann Mobley played Maggie McKinney Drummond for the last season of Diff'rent Strokes in 1985 and 86, about 11 episodes as the new Mrs. Drummond. Most fans barely remember her in the role, but the woman herself was something else entirely. She was born February 17, 1937, in Biloxi, Mississippi, and raised in the little town of Brandon. In 1959, she became the first Mississippian ever crowned Miss America. She turned that crown into a real career, studying under the legendary acting coach Lee Strasberg, signing with MGM, and starring opposite Elvis Presley in not 1 but 2 films in 1965. That same year, Hollywood named her one of its most promising newcomers. For decades, she was everywhere on television. Perry Mason, Love American Style, Fantasy Island, Falcon Crest. In 1967, she married the actor and talk show host Gary Collins, and they stayed together until his death in 2012. But what she may have been proudest of had nothing to do with acting. Mobley became a documentary filmmaker, traveling to Cambodia, Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, and Sudan to show the world children dying of war and famine. She lived with Crohn's disease, and spent years telling other sufferers they did not have to fight it alone. She raised money for the March of Dimes, for breast cancer research, for children with disabilities. In 2009, Mary Ann Mobley was diagnosed with breast cancer. She fought it and lived. Then it came back, and the second time, it came back aggressive. She died at her home in Beverly Hills on December 9, 2014, of complications from the disease. She was 77. Her funeral was held back home in Jackson, Mississippi. Maggie was the new wife written in to freshen up a show that was already dying. Mary Ann Mobley was a Miss America who had already conquered everything that beauty could win, and spent her final years quietly fighting a disease twice with the same grace she'd worn in the crown. Number 4. Dixie Carter. Here's the strange thing about that role of Maggie. The woman everyone does remember playing it spent the rest of her life trying to forget the show. Before Mary Ann Mobley, the original Maggie McKinney was played by Dixie Carter. She joined Diff'rent Strokes in 1984. An aerobics instructor who falls for Mr. Drummond, marries him, and brings her young son into the family. And then, almost as quickly as she arrived, she was gone. The reason is the part that makes this one sting. When NBC canceled the show, Carter left for a project that would make her a legend, Designing Women, where she played the magnificent, fire-breathing Julia Sugarbaker for 7 seasons. She found the role of her life the moment she walked away from this one, and by most accounts, she rarely looked back. She seldom spoke about her time on Diff'rent Strokes at all. There may have been more to it than ambition. By several accounts, Carter and the show's young star, Gary Coleman, did not get along on set. An awkward dynamic for two people playing step and stepson, and there was real tension behind the scenes. Whatever the full truth, she did not linger. While the rest of the cast was bound together by tragedy, Dixie Carter quietly closed the door on it and moved up the street to bigger things. She was born May 25, 1939 in tiny McClemmersville, Tennessee. A trained singer with a voice that could fill a theater, she built a career on stage, in cabaret, and on television. She was married to the actor Hal Holbrook for the last 26 years of her life. In 2007, near the end of her career, she earned an Emmy nomination for a guest run on Desperate Housewives. Dixie Carter died on April 10, 2010, of complications from endometrial cancer. She was 70. Her famous husband was at her side. Maggie married into the Drummond family and stayed. Dixie Carter married into this cast and got out as fast as she could, and found her greatest fame the moment she did. The curse took almost everyone who stayed in that house. The woman who walked away still didn't make it past 70. Number 5. Charlotte Rae. If anyone truly escaped the curse of Diff'rent Strokes, it was the housekeeper. Charlotte Rae played Edna Garrett, Mrs. Garrett, the warm, fussing heart of the Drummond home in the show's first 2 seasons. She was so beloved that the network built an entire spin-off around her. In 1979, Mrs. Garrett packed her bags, left the Drummonds for a girls' boarding school, and became the star of The Facts of Life, one of the longest-running sitcoms of the decade. She didn't just survive Diff'rent Strokes, she graduated from it. She was born Charlotte Rae Lubotsky on April 22, 1926, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants. Her father ran a tire business. Her mother, remarkably, had been a childhood friend of Golda Meir, the future Prime Minister of Israel. Rae studied at Northwestern, moved to New York at 22, and built a career that would span 66 years. Broadway nightclubs, Sesame Street, and an Emmy and Tony nomination along the way. But the woman who played America's gentlest TV mother carried a private war, and it was a cruel irony. On The Facts of Life, Mrs. Garrett was the wise house mother who guided teenage girls through the dangers of drinking and drugs. Off camera, Charlotte Rae was an alcoholic, and she said so plainly in her later years. Alcohol, she admitted, had been her own drug of choice. She wrote about her struggles and about a difficult marriage in a memoir co-authored with her son. At 56, her heart needed help, and she was fitted with a pacemaker. The serenity of Mrs. Garrett was a performance built over a great deal of private pain. Then came the cancer. In 2009, with a brutal family history behind her, her mother, her sister, and an uncle had all died of pancreatic cancer. Rae was diagnosed with it herself. By all odds, she should not have survived. After surgery and 6 months of chemotherapy, she did. She called it a miracle. In April 2017, at 91, she revealed she had been diagnosed again, this time with bone cancer. And she said something that has stayed with people ever since. She said she wasn't in pain, that she'd had a wonderful life, and that given the choice between more treatment and simply living what time she had left, she chose life. Charlotte Rae died at her home in Los Angeles on August 5, 2018, surrounded by her family. She was 92. Her old castmate Todd Bridges posted a tribute and noted the painful truth. With her gone, he was the last one of them left. Edna Garrett packed up and left the Drummonds for a quieter life across town. Charlotte Rae packed up and left the curse itself, outliving nearly every person she'd shared that house with, and choosing, right to the end, to be grateful. Number 6, Conrad Bain, and now the father. Conrad Bain played Philip Drummond, the wealthy Park Avenue widower who took in 2 boys from Harlem and raised them as his own. He was in all 189 episodes. He was the calm at the center of the chaos, the man whose decency made the whole premise believable. Before Diff'rent Strokes, he'd already spent 6 seasons as the next-door neighbor on another Norman Lear hit, Maude. He had a working actor's whole life behind him. He was born February 4, 1923, in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, and he was a twin. His brother Bonar was an actor too. Conrad trained at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, married his wife Monica in 1945, and stayed married to her for 64 years until her death in 2009. 3 children. A long, steady, decent life, the kind his character would have approved of. Conrad Bain died on January 14, 2013, at his home in Livermore, California, after a stroke. He was 89. By the measure of this cast, his was the gentlest ending of all. Old age, at home, a full life lived. But here is the detail that turns Conrad Bain's quiet death into something heartbreaking. Philip Drummond's whole purpose, the entire reason the show existed, was a promise to a dying woman that he would raise her children. And in real life, Conrad Bain kept that role longer than anyone should have to. He outlived the children television gave him. Dana Plato, his TV daughter, was gone by 1999. Gary Coleman, his TV son, the boy who made the show famous, was gone by 2010. Bain buried them both before his own time came. Philip Drummond promised a dying mother he would care for her sons as if they were his own. Conrad Bain kept that promise off the screen too, and lived long enough to mourn 2 of the children that promise gave him. Number 7, Dana Plato. And so we come to the one whose story breaks the most hearts. The Golden Girl, the daughter. Dana Plato played Kimberly Drummond, Mr. Drummond's biological daughter, the pretty older sister, the one whose biggest problem on screen was usually a school dance or a boy. Off-screen, she was a genuine teen idol of the late 70s. The whole country watched her grow up in that house. She was born Dana Michelle Strain on November 7, 1964, in California, and adopted as a baby by Dean and Kay Plato. Her parents divorced when she was 3, and her mother raised her, taking her to casting calls as a child. At 9, she was nearly cast as the possessed girl in The Exorcist, until her mother read the script and refused. The role went to Linda Blair instead. At 13, Dana landed Diff'rent Strokes, and her life changed forever. She left the show in 1984 when she became pregnant in real life. The writers Kimberly out, sent her off to Paris, and the most famous teenage girl in America was, essentially, let go. In an era when a pregnant 19-year-old was considered poison for a family sitcom, the show made its choice, and Dana paid for it. She had her son, Tyler, with the musician she'd married. And after that, the fall was long and merciless. The work dried up almost overnight. In 1989, hoping to be taken seriously again, she posed for Playboy, and Hollywood took her even less seriously after it. The money she'd made as a child, a reported $100,000 an episode, was gone. In 1991, she moved to Las Vegas, walked into a video store, pulled a gun on the clerk, and walked out with about $200. She was arrested within minutes. In one of the stranger footnotes of this whole story, the entertainer Wayne Newton posted her $13,000 bail. The next year, she was convicted of forging a prescription for Valium and served 30 days in jail. By the late 90s, the parts she could get were softcore films and a video game. She struggled with addiction for almost her entire adult life, fighting in public and in front of the same cameras that had built her, to claw her way back to the girl she'd been. By 1999, she believed she finally had. She had a new fiancé who was managing her comeback, and on May 7th of that year, she went on the Howard Stern radio show to announce it to the world. She told the audience she was clean. She told them she was sober. Stern asked her about the $100,000 an episode she'd once made and where it had all gone, and she answered honestly, the way someone does when they have nothing left to hide. She was so determined to prove she was clean that when hostile callers phoned in to taunt her, she offered to take a drug test live on the air. But the callers were cruel, and friends say she left that studio shaken and low. The next day, May 8, 1999, she and her fiancé were driving back to Los Angeles when they stopped in Moore, Oklahoma, at his mother's home for a Mother's Day visit. In the afternoon, Dana said she wasn't feeling well. She had taken a combination of prescription medication, a powerful painkiller, and a muscle relaxant, and she went to lie down in the motorhome parked outside the house. Her fiancé joined her, noticed she felt cold, covered her with a blanket, and fell asleep. When he woke that evening, he couldn't wake her. His mother, a nurse, ran out and started CPR. It was too late. Dana Plato was 34 years old. At first, police thought it was an accident. There was no note, no obvious sign. But days later, the state medical examiner ruled her death a suicide, citing the lethal level of drugs in her system and her long history. One day after she stood up in front of the whole country and swore she was going to be okay, the golden girl of different strokes was gone. And if the story ended there, it would already be one of the saddest in television. But it doesn't end there. Dana's son Tyler was just 14 when his mother died. He grew up in her shadow, and by his own family's account, he never got over losing her. On May 6, 2010, almost exactly 11 years to the day after his mother's death, and just days before Mother's Day, Tyler Lambert took his own life. He was 25. His grandmother said he had been talking sweetly to her on the phone that very morning. "You never can tell," she said. "What's in their mind?" She said simply that Tyler had wanted to be with his mother. Kimberly Drummond was the lucky one, the rich man's daughter whose worst was a bad date. Dana Plato was found in a parked motorhome at 34, one day after promising she'd finally made it. And 11 years later, the boy who was 14 when he lost her followed her into the same dark. Some curses don't stop at one generation. 7 people who walked through the door of that Park Avenue apartment are gone. Gary Coleman, the star, dead at 42 at the bottom of a staircase no one can fully explain. Nedra Voles, who lived to 94. Mary Ann Mobley, a Miss America taken by cancer at 77. Dixie Carter, who got out and still didn't reach 71. Charlotte Ray, who beat the odds twice and chose life until she was 92. Conrad Bain, the father who buried his television children before his own end at 89. And Dana Plato and her son Tyler, a tragedy that refused to stay in one lifetime. One member of that core family is still here. Todd Bridges, Willis, the one who said the other half of that famous line the brother Arnold was always talking about. His own road was nearly as dark as anyone's. After the show, he sank into cocaine addiction, was arrested more than once, and in 1989 stood trial for attempted murder before being acquitted. He could easily have been an 8th name on this list. Instead, he got clean, and stayed clean, for decades. Today, he tours the country talking to young people about the very things that almost killed him. He is the last man standing from the Drummond house. When Charlotte Ray died, he wrote that his heart was heavy, that he missed all of his castmates. He has had to say goodbye more times than anyone should. 2 more who joined later are also still with us. Danny Cooksey, who played Maggie's young son Sam's, and Mary Jo Catlett, the housekeeper Pearl, who found a whole second life as the voice of Mrs. Puff on SpongeBob SquarePants. They are the lucky ones. People love to call it the Diff'rent Strokes curse, like something supernatural reached out and touched these lives. But there was nothing supernatural about it. It was childhood fame with no net under it. It was money that drew the wrong people close. It was children who were adored by millions of strangers and protected by far too few. The show sold America a fantasy of a family that could fix anything with 30 minutes and a hug. The real families behind it had no such luck. The Drummond house was never real, but the people who lived in it were, and most of them are gone now. So here's our question for you tonight. Of all 7, whose story hit you the hardest? And which of these deaths do you think the world has unfairly forgotten? Tell us in the comments. We read them all. If this is the kind of true story you want more of, subscribe, because next time we're opening another door you thought you knew.